So I heard it was warm there today.
90.
That's warm.
Over 100 where you're at?
Not today. You know, you guys, we're only 2 degrees below you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, above you. Forgive me.
Oh, above. Okay.
Last week it was around 110. A little high by Arizona standards, even for this time of year. But today, yesterday in the 90s, which here feels like about 80.
Okay.
Right, Jason, do you see the screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
So it's
and begin.
glorious.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Dearborn Heights Library's webinar series. This session is on the great paperback covers of the 40s and 50s with pop culture historian Greg Turner. Archivist and auctioneer, Greg writes columns for Fabulous Finds and retro reviews for the Back to the Past website. You'll spot him at nearly every live auction, and in his off time, he'll be spinning classic garage rock 45s wherever he can find a turntable. Without further ado, here's Greg Turner.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. I know Rob is going to turn the controls over to me here. But in the first place, I want to say that I do want to make a correction. We are featuring the classic paperback covers of the 50s and 60s rather than the 40s and 50s. And, so it's technically, classic paperback covers, 50s and 60s, or you can judge a paperback book by its cover. So, am I now in control, Rob? Let's see if...
And your microphone is so directional that when you face away from it, your voice drops off.
Okay, I will try to remember to set there. Now, is everybody looking at a paperback book called Perry Mason, The Case of the Lucky Legs?
Not yet.
Not yet, huh?
Not yet.
Did you share it with me, Rob? Or allow me to?
Here's one.
Oh, did you get one?
No. Yeah, let's talk about this one. My all-time favorite.
You're holding something up then, huh? You're not seeing the paperback book cover I just shared.
No.
No, I'm not, Greg. Sorry. Or this one. We can talk about this one.
All right, Rob, have you done something different?
No.
Or even this one.
Okay, I'm going to exit totally out. Oh, that's a nice one, Chris.
Why, thank you. Sing me a murder, baby.
Have you switched the host to me, Rob?
Yes. All I had to do was stop my screen. So.
Okay, here we go. All right, now can everybody see Perry Mason's The Case of the Lucky Legs?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, before we talk about this, I want to mention that basically this presentation will be leaning toward mostly private investigators and maybe a little bit of spy action and things like that.
Remember, your voice trails off, Greg. Excuse me.
It goes off. Well, I'll have to lean into my computer then.
No, just
turn
left or right. It disappears.
Okay. I will try not to turn left or right as much as I cannot do. Okay. Well, without any talking about this topic, we have to talk about the greats that I don't have paperback book covers for is Dashiell Hammett, who wrote the classic Sam Spades, Nick and Nora, and Continental Ops. He wrote these classics back in the 20s, as a matter of fact. And then the man that followed him almost immediately was the great Raymond Chandler, who wrote the PI Philip Marlowe. So I do own their books, but they don't have great artwork on them, so I chose not to share them. But those two are pretty much known as the fathers of the hard-boiled PI kind of character. Hammett's characters generally were on the East Coast, and Philip Marlowe's, Chandler's great character came from California. So we move then into the 30s, and the first character I want to talk about here is Perry Mason. Now, most people think of him as a defense attorney, right? You saw him on television back in the 60s. But really, the first 10 books that Earl Stanley Gardner wrote about Perry Mason, truthfully, he was more PI than he was a lawyer. He came off particularly hard-boiled, throwing his weight around, breaking and entering, and other PI shenanigans, so to speak. not above keeping a bottle of whiskey in his desk or roughing up a suspect or two. This is one of his longer lasting characters. In fact, he wrote 86 novels featuring Perry Mason. Shortly thereafter, he was still a super creative, Gardner was, created another character series. It featured a detective agency featuring Bertha Cool and Donald Lamb. These books were issued under the, I didn't want to go that fast yet. I guess I wanted to show you some more Perry Mason novel covers here. So these books were by, sorry, I thought my titles would show here. So hold on a sec. Bear with me here as I'm learning something here as well.
That's a great one.
Okay, what I've got to do here.
Case
Okay,
of the
maybe I can pull this off to the side now. Okay, you're still seeing the Case of the Curious Bride? Or are you seeing more than that now?
Curious Bride is what I'm seeing.
Okay, very good. So both that first book and this book was by an artist by the name of John Fernie. Fernie was actually a Scotsman who immigrated over here to the U.S. and started doing paperbacks in actually he came to Canada and then to the U.S. So starting in the 40s and early 50s, he started doing these covers. So these first two books were by John Fernie. Then we move into one of my favorites, as Chris knows, this is Robert McGinnis. Robert McGinnis is still painting and drawing today. He's in his 90s now, but he still does original book covers for a book line called Hard Case Crimes. I'm not sure if that's anything that the library stocks, but I would highly recommend you check that line out. They do a lot of reprinting of these old classic books from the 40s and 50s that had disappeared completely. They haven't been reprinted since they came out back in the day. So it's a great line if you have a chance to check them out at a bookstore or at the library. But Robert McGinnis is probably my favorite paperback book cover artist. He did that one. He did this one. Again, we're talking more Perry Masons here as well. I try to give you a variety. I'm lacking only, I think now, 8 books in this series, the Perry Mason series of whatever I told you, 86 books that there are. So I've got a ways, not too much further, but I'm working on completing that run. And then, as I said, under the name, I guess one final Perry Mason here.
Oh, that's great.
Husband. This is a great one, I think. I might mention that all these books have been scanned from my collection. I did not go online for any of this stuff. This is all owned by me. So some of them look really nice. Some of them, have rips out of them or a corner bent or whatever. But anyway, you're seeing what I actually own. Next up, as I said, Earl Stanley Gardner, writing under the A.A. Fair.
I can't hear.
Nor can I.
Oh.
That's why I'm trying to signal him.
He's got his microphone off.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to signal that we can't hear. We can't hear you. Your mic is off. Your microphone is off.
Okay, how about now?
There we go.
I'm not sure what happened, why that went off, but I apologize for that. Back, I guess, did you hear anything about A.A. Fair and the Donald Lamb Bertha Cool series?
No.
Okay. Well, Gardner created these characters. What's unusual about this is that the owner of the agency is a woman named Bertha Cool. She smokes too much, she drinks too much, she lives life large, and she is a rather large woman. And Donald Lamb is a kind of failed lawyer who goes to work for her as a PI, and he's a very diminutive man, and he finds ways to solve the crimes with his brains more than his fists. So he's kind of an unusual PI. And that one is also by McGinnis, as you can tell. This next one is also a McGinnis, another great cover here. Bats Fly at Dusk. That's one of my favorites. Crows Can't Count. I don't know, if these are available at the library, but that's a great series to look out for, or you might be able to find them through Kindle or places like that where you can download it to your reader or whatever. But a great series all the same. And one more AA Fair, Top of the Heat. A blonde bombshell cover right there. The Bam and Cool books ran from like 1939 to 1970. Next on the scene, also in 1939, was Brett Halliday's Michael Shayne character, and there are about 77 novels in paperback form, but there have been over 300, count them, 300 short stories featuring Michael Shayne. So everything from Manhunt back in the 50s to the Mike Shayne Mystery Magazine or digest that ran through the 70s, all featured this particular character. An interesting case is that Halliday actually married off the detective early on, and so after about 10 books, they decided that wasn't working, so they actually killed off his wife and then introduced a new secretary who ran through as his secretary through the rest of the series. This one's Target Mike Shayne, another blonde beauty cover. You knew what you were getting when you were buying these books back in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, those are great.
To Kill. Again, these are all McGinnis covers. As Chris knows, by far my favorite paperback book artist. Death Has Three Lives. Another cool cover.
Yeah.
Michael Shayne's Long Chance. So, Girl in a Hammock. Can't beat that. And actually, later on in the late 60s, this would have been late 50s, early 60s. In the late 60s, they reprinted this book with a new cover. Again, this is Michael Shayne's Long Chance. Again, McGinnis reprising or doing a new cover for that book. That happens occasionally. In fact, it happens in the next two books, too. This one comes back from June of 1959, though it's copyright in 45, just so you know where it came from. A great Lady in Red here, marked for murder. And then late in the 60s, it was reprinted. Actually, not late, early in the 60s, 63, it was reprinted, again, marked for murder with a new Robert Maguire cover. So classic covers, one and all for those books. Next up is a book by Harold Q. Mazer featuring a PI called Scott Jordan. Scott was another, created character to fill in the need as that came about in the 40s and 50s for characters like this. He again was also a lawyer, so it was not unusual in the 50s, late 40s, for the characters to both be lawyers and private investigators, or they investigated their own cases. This particular book has an artist by the name of Barry Phillips. So interesting cover. In the goblet, you see the woman with the jewels, and looks like her poker chips or some kind of betting chips, so she may be at a casino or something. Another in that same series, Scott Jordan. This one is also by Harold Mazer. This one is an artist by the name of Victor Kalin, K-A-L-I-N. Murder on Broadway. So I think we have one more Scott Jordan as we go later into it. This is probably very late 60s, maybe even in the 70 or 71. I think this might be the last book in the series, at least that I own, The Legacy Lenders. And this one is by an artist by the name of Michael Holtz. I like the fact that they've over the kneeling or leaning over man, you're creating a kind of a 3D effect there. Pretty cool cover. Would make me want to buy the book new, but I'm sure I had to find it years later in the used book marketplaces. So after Scott Jordan, another great author was Frank Kane, and he wrote a PI called Johnny Liddell. Johnny Liddell, and this one is one of the early ones called Light for Death. This particular book also is got a cover by Victor Kalin. He's the one that did The Murder on Broadway a couple of books ago, and in fact, he did the next one too, which is a classic one as well. A Real Gone Guy. Again, this is a Johnny Liddell mystery. Pretty cool image, I think.
Yeah, great colors.
Yep. And then as we get into the later 60s, this almost looks like, if you were not in the know, this looks like a Robert McGinnis cover. I think that, well, I know that it isn't. It is drawn by or painted by an artist by the name of Ron Lesser. I suspect that he was asked to draw in the McGinnis style because most of his covers, which came later than a lot of the early McGinnis covers, are very similar in style. But you can see just above the Frank Kane name, you can see Lesser right there. But a great classic cover on that book. And another one also by Ron Lesser, Two to Tango. So another good book. I don't think he did quite the facial facial features as good as McGinnis. He did bodies good, clothing and accessories nicely. I don't think his facial drawing was quite up to speed, in my opinion. And I think I got one more Johnny Liddell here. I do. A Spirit Decor. And another great cover. If you didn't know better, you'd think that was McGinnis. I like the fact that obviously they're in a casino as well. You can see the roulette wheel to her right and chips to her left. Got a classic floral print dress on. Interesting kind of beehive hairdo as well. So
yeah,
pretty neat cover if you.
Yeah, very cool.
Exactly. So let's see what's up after Liddell. Before I go to the next man, I want to mention, and it doesn't really pay any attention to anything, but I I'm not sure if I wrote about a book like this or somehow I got contacted by Frank Kane's grandson. Maybe he saw me buying these, or I had some duplicates I was selling on eBay or whatever. And he contacted me and said, you know, he was looking for, 10 particular books that his grandfather wrote, and he was trying to get them for his mother, which would have been his mother. So Frank Kane's daughter, so that she would have a complete set. Apparently, he did not leave her a copy of all of his books. So he was trying to gather them for his mom. So I was able to help him out with 3 or 4, but unfortunately I couldn't solve and get all of his books for him. But I thought that was kind of cool to be contacted out of nowhere from somebody who wrote these books back in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up is another Kane. This one is Henry Kane. And Henry Kane wrote a PI by the name of Pete Chambers. So again, this is the case of the murdered madam. You can kind of see above Kane's to the right of his last name, that's signed by Barry again. This is Barry Phillips. We saw a couple of things earlier that he did. Here's another one, series that he did. Pete Chambers was again a pretty standard PI at the time. There were 35 books written about him.
We're losing you again, Greg. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Let me double check and make sure I'm.
No, I meant just the turning of the head.
Okay. Well, I have to have some notes, so I guess I have to hold them over the screen so that I don't cover my voice or lose my voice. I'm surprised I lose it that quickly, just barely turning my head.
It drops off. Sorry.
All right, I apologize. I will try to do better, or just talk from memory and not from my notes. Another Henry Kane, Peter Chambers novel. This one is another Ron Lesser. Very much, again, this is kind of cool. You see her in a reflection in the mirror with looks like a picture of martinis, maybe one of with an olive in it on the table in front of her. Kind of a cool perspective, but this is a Ron Lesser cover. Another Henry Kane here, Death of a Flack. This is a new artist, at least that we haven't talked about, and that's by the name of Robert Abbott. And let me see if I can find Robert Abbott for a moment here. If I can find my notes without losing my voice.
Maybe if you lean a bit to your right, you can still check your notes and get a decent voice pickup.
I appreciate it. All right. Abbott was actually born in Indiana. He was the son of a paint salesman. He served in the U.S. Navy Air Corps during World War II. Actually earned his degree in Missouri, though he went to New York City and made his fame. He did a lot of books here for an author by the name of Robert Kyle. Richard Deming did a couple for A.A. Fair, obviously the Gardner books. So he did a number of things as well. Interesting style, maybe doesn't speak to me quite as well as McGinnis, but still a very nice book cover. Moving on to the next author and PI, the fabulous Lou Archer. Lou Archer was written by Ross McDonald. This is the first book in the series, The Moving Target. Again, if you just wanted to sample the PI genre, this would be a great place to start. A lot of people consider him to be the heir apparent for the Raymond Chandler Marlowe books. He kind of took over that hard-boiled detective and updated it into the 60s. So it's a little more modern than if you go back and read Hammett or Chandler, which is definitely dated. Still worth checking out if you've never read either of those authors. I would highly recommend those. Is a great place to start. But you won't go wrong with Ross McDonald and Lou Archer novels. There were only 18 books, so that's a little more doable if you're trying to collect them all. They had these great covers by an artist by the name of Mitchell Hooks.
Mitchell what again? Sorry?
Mitchell Hooks. H-O-O-K-S. I won't turn and talk. I'll find what I'm looking for, and then I'll come back to the mic and talk. Hang on 1 second.
It's, Greg, for what it's worth, too, it seems to pick up a little better on your right. But yeah, it's a, I know it's a technology.
Maybe that's where the microphone is. I'll lean in that direction.
If that helps. I don't know.
Okay. If you're a science fiction reader or collector, he was also known for doing the newspaper Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon after Raymond no longer did it. He was actually raised here in Detroit, Michigan, so he's our local boy. He, at one point in time, worked for General Motors. He also served in World War II in the U.S. Army, and then finally, when he came back, settled in New York City, where he became a paperback an artist, and then made his money doing, or extra money anyway, doing paperback covers. Here's the next one. Very similar in style, where he's got a large facial of the hero, and then things that were going on in the books also taking place around him. So there's the girl in front. There looks like some sort of ambulance team on the left of the book, and then there's a police car and bus on the right. That's the far side of the dollar. Here's the way some people die. Again, hero's large face. You can't quite see the features, but you see a bikini girl, a dead body in front, and it looks like, a Miami or Palm Springs or something background there with the palm trees. I guess that's all of those I have, so I apologize for that. We move on to the next guy. Richard Prather wrote a character called Shell Scott. Shell is one of my favorite books, heroes. He's a little more tongue-in-cheek. He's definitely a hard-boiled PI, just like, the classics. But he came about just shortly after the Mike Hammer books by Mickey Spillane. And I don't have any of those examples because the Spillanes I own came from the 70s that all have photo covers on them rather than artwork covers. So that's a glaring omission from tonight's presentation, is the fact that I don't have any Mike Hammer covers. But Prather is like Mike Hammer Light, or Shel Scott is Mike Hammer Light. So there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek, a lot of fun and games going on as he falls into strange predicaments. And, you know, there's a girl falling into his bed, you know, every other chapter kind of a thing or whatever. But again, if you want a lighthearted PI romp, Prather's Shel Scott series is the way to go. Some great covers. Another Barry Phillips cover on this one. Actually, there were 36 books in the series, ran from 1950 through 1987, believe it or not. So a big following in the Shel Scott books, as you see up at the top. At this one, over 30 million copies of Shel Scott books in print. Pretty impressive. Here's another one, also Barry Phillips, Three's a Shroud. Classic portrait of Shel Scott in the front corner there. He was known because he had white hair. He was a young man, but like Steve Martin, he had white hair and these bushy white eyebrows. So that's kind of what his trademark look was. And then we move into, again, some more covers done by my favorite artist, Robert McGinnis. So this one is Darling It's Death. Again, you get the classic Shel Scott emblem up at the top in the circle. Then you get the classic dame in gold lame there. And if you look at the very bottom, I had the luck of finding a signed copy by not the artist, not the author, but the artist. So that one is personally signed by Robert McGinnis. So that's one of my favorites. As you can see, my book does have a black marker on the top, so it's not mint condition. Got a little bit of a bend in the bottom right corner as well. But hey, it's signed by the artist, so I love it. A great cover on this one, the Scrambled Yeggs. They changed, the original book came out in the 50s. It was called Pattern for Murder, pretty classic, or, you know, title for it. But they decided that, you know, Scott was a bit of a Yahoo or whatever. So they decided they'd change the name to Scrambled Yeggs. So again, another great girl cover in a bikini with some floral pillows there and some kind of looks like a bearskin rug maybe. Another one of my all-time favorite covers, Slab Happy. There's nothing like going to a funeral and find a bikini girl holding a machine gun sitting on the coffin. Does that make you want to buy the book or not?
Happens all the time.
At least some of the guys, maybe not the ladies. But I have to admit that a lot of these covers are going to speak maybe more to the men of the world back in the 50s and 60s than the ladies. But I think this is a fun read. So, you know, it's not like soft core porno or anything like that. It's just, you know, it's just fun. So with that said, we'll move to the next one. Take a Murdered Darling. You know, nobody that I know of ever had a secretary that came to work in a bikini, but that's what it appears there that she's doing. And then I think I have one more, Kill the Clown. Another classic. Looks like she might be a showgirl wearing bubbles and all in pink and a gold shiny mirror ball behind her. And love the cigarette and the pink cigarette holder that she's holding in her right hand there. But again, a Shel Scott novel, subtitled His Wildest Fling. So, like I said, those are just kind of fun books. PI light, I guess I would call them. You know, he gets hit over the head occasionally, and he, you know, has to pull a gun occasionally. But generally, you know, there's not a lot of death other than maybe somebody dies at the beginning that he gets pulled into the case kind of a situation. So he was another West Coast character out of California mostly. And there are a lot of books that I would recommend in that series. So next up, really not a PI, but you can't really talk about paperbacks in the 60s without mentioning Milo Marsh. Again, these are early McGinnis covers. If anybody recognize the model that posed for the male character, it's not a real clear scan, unfortunately. Maybe the next one will, or the one after that will show it better. He wasn't a true PI. This character, Milo Marsh, was a insurance investigator.
James Colburn?
James Colburn, very good. I think maybe it shows up a little bit better here as he's turning to look from the other side of the chair. That's exactly who McGinnis based the character artwork on. A lot of the series here also featured a lot of props, but always featured the character Milo Marsh as well, generally as a pretty lady and generally some sort of a prop So here's one of these. I don't know. My daughter-in-law knows the name of these kind of chairs. Papa, I don't know. There's some kind of a Papa something chair that are these round circular chairs that he's sitting here on this cover. So again, I apologize for the quality of the scan. I'm not sure why those three have these lines running through them, but that's what's next.
That's a
And
fun
then
image.
again, going away from PIs, as long as we're taking a moment, the classic Ian Fleming James Bond thrillers. So obviously 50s and 60s defined by the writing of Ian Fleming, James Bond being the character that inspired so much American television. Things like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., heck, even Get Smart.
And Wild Wild West, I think.
Wild Wild West was kind of based on this as well, Chris. You are absolutely right. But a classic cover here where Fleming's name is the biggest thing you see, the title, and then the fact that it's a James Bond book running down the right-hand side made these distinctive. Again, the artist is one we've talked about earlier, is Barry Phillips. Again, he doesn't get really his due. Oops, I goofed up there.
Those Bond novels are very, I mean, even though the drawing on the, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just
No, that's
remember
all right, Chris. We got time.
buying all those for a dime at a rummage sale, maybe like a lot of us. And
Yep.
those James Bond paperback with those small drawing in the middle, but whether it was Dr. No or Moonraker or for your, they came through in my memory so clearly in terms of how they looked. It just really jumped out at you. And then, of course, you get the Diamonds Are Forever, which has the Connery poster version paperback novel, which fills up the whole cover.
I didn't show that one, but I've got one here by McGinnis, also Thunderball. So again, it's in the same style. It says James Bond thriller down the right-hand side. That was very unusual to see that at that time. It was the only series that I knew of that did that. And again, this one is drawn by McGinnis. Clearly, it's the Sean Connery character as Bond, James Bond there. So
but even those small ones were very endearing, and they stayed with you because just the image itself was always very well done.
Well, I wouldn't get rid of my paperbacks. Obviously, I've kept them. But in the early 2000s, I think it was Penguin maybe put out like the oversized paperback that had some great covers as well. I just chose not to. I rebought the series again so that I had all those covers too, because I thought they were so great. So I'm one of these guys that have been known to buy a book because of its cover, and then later find out that the series is well worth it as well. I buy them for the covers and then read them and think, oh, I love this so much, I've got to go check out and track down every other book in that series type of a situation.
Sure.
All right, so after the Fleming Bond books, there's another famous author by the name of Michael Avalon that probably most of you have never heard of. Michael Avalon wrote so many paperback books during his time, a lot of them under his own name, a lot of them under pseudonyms. This one features his new character called Ed Noon, another typical hard-boiled PI. Michael Avalon also wrote a number of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. novel tie-ins in the late 60s under his own name, as well as other people's names as well. So this one is, the artist by the name of Rudy Nappy. So we haven't talked about him before, but let me find my notes on Nappy here for a second, which will give my voice a rest as well. All right. Rudolph, or Rudy Nappy, was born in New York. He studied the arts in New York City. He served in the Air Force in World War II as well. And he married a nurse, as a matter of fact. He became a commercial illustrator. And during a decades-long career, he created hundreds of covers for magazines and books. So he was probably more famous for the ladies and the guys when you were young. He drew the covers to the Nancy Drew series as well as the Hardy Boy books. So those that grew up with those series, certainly, I guess I could have considered those PIs because, you know, they were investigators. I didn't go that route, though, for whatever reason. I don't own them in paperback either. I own those 60s blue-backed hardcover Hardy Boy books. I've got the complete run of those. Yeah. And I own a couple of the Nancy Drews, which had the yellow spines, I believe. But I didn't think to add those in that area as well. But anyway, Ed Noon was a great character. He ran a ton of books, about 32 books as a matter of fact. And I think he was in about 90 short stories as well. Again, Manhunt magazine, Digest magazine back in the 50s was a classic in running short stories. And then through the Michael Shane Digest short story books. Shel Scott even had a run of 10 or 12 of those digest size books series as well. I happen to own those as well. So Michael Avalon did a lot of things. This is his most popular character, Ed Noon. This one, again, is by Mitchell Hooks. He's the one we saw on those Lou Archer novels earlier. So The Voodoo Murders is that one. Next up, I guess we switch from, again, a PI to a spy. Another classic spy novelization. He's an American spy, not a British spy. Edward S. Ahrens wrote about a character called Sam Durrell. He was born and raised in Louisiana. His code name was the Cajun. This particular cover is a Barry Phillips cover. If you've never read these types of books before and want to give another spy series a try that isn't British James Bond books, I highly recommend the Edward Ahrens books. A lot of the titles started with assignment. This was assignment Burma Girl. Here's assignment Mara Tarana.
Look at that one.
This is a great classic McGinnis cover as well. Known for his tall women, svelte ladies, sensual face. Look at those eyes on her.
Yeah,
classic cover on that one. Guys, that's where you should be looking at her eyes. Next up, later on, is assignment Carlotta Cortez. Again, this is a McGinnis cover. Maybe not quite as striking because it's not a full cover, but still an excellent cover. Certainly would make it worth your while. You can see I got it for 45 cents. When it was new, it sold for 75. So again, these are my actual books you're seeing. Next up was another kind of forgotten detective. His name was Chester or Chet Drum, written by Stephen Marlowe. He's no relation to the fictional Philip Marlowe that Raymond Chandler wrote about. This is a very good series as well. There's not a ton of these in the series. They often had words like violence or is my business or murder is my game, titles that really caught your eye at the time. Actually, there's 20 books in this series. First one came out in 55. The last one came out in 68. I'm still looking for 2, I think, or 3 of these books to complete my run. Again, you can see the name by her foot, Barry. That's Barry Phillips, again, the artist on that one. And he does this next one too, Danger is My Line. You can just see the B down in the bottom of the cover. He didn't even get his whole name in there. But that's who it is, Barry Phillips. One neat thing about this particular PI is generally all of his books take place out of the country. So he's doing his investigation in Spain or in, Bosnia or France or wherever. Rarely did he actually have an adventure featured where it took place in the US of A. So it's a good chance to see other parts of the world through reading a typical hard-boiled PI book. Next up is a house name book called Carter Brown. Carter Brown, in actuality, was a gentleman, or most of the books were written by a gentleman called Alan Jeffrey Yates. Alan Yates wrote probably 90 or 95% of these books that appeared under the name Carter Brown. He wrote hundreds of them. He featured a rotating cast of different characters. He wrote about a Lieutenant Al Wheeler. He wrote about a New York private eye, Danny Boyd, another Hollywood private eye, Rick Holman, and then even a female private eye by the name of Mavis Sleetitz. I may be pronouncing their last name wrong, but again, this particular one is early in the series and was drawn by Barry Phillips again. Again, kind of a gold lame dress and a blonde looking over her right shoulder. Then another one, this one actually you can see by the cover, features the policeman Al Wheeler. Again, this is a Robert McGinnis cover. Yates wrote 40 Al Wheeler books. He wrote 39 Danny Boyd books.
We're losing you again, Greg. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry. No, I'm glad you tell me because I need to know that. He wrote 40 books featuring the policeman Al Wheeler. He wrote 39 featuring PI Danny Boyd, another 35 featuring Rick Holman, and only 8 starring Mavis Sleetitz, though she did appear co-starring in one of the Al Wheeler novels. So sometimes he had his characters cross over. So anyway, here's Lament for a Lousy Lover. Again, this is a McGinnis cover as well. This is a classic one in my opinion. It's Angel. Simply put, another Al Wheeler novel. Again, like before, you'd see them reprint some of these. They were so popular here in the U.S. Oh, I guess that's one thing I should mention. Yates actually was born and raised in England. He then moved to Australia. Yet all of his characters are written about and live in the US of A. So he knew where the marketplace was for this kind of artwork. So that's what he did. He wrote it there in Australia, and then it was sold there as well as reprinted with McGinnis covers and others here in the US. So this is the early book of Angel, and then later on it was reprinted. Again, this is a slightly, maybe it's this brown tone that makes my scanner kind of make lines in it, because I noticed this one's got lines in it as well. So I apologize for that. I didn't notice that when I was scanning these in. So this was a reprint of the other one. Then we have The Sad-Eyed Seductress. Very, very unusual. As you can see, this book is actually printed sideways. So to get the whole picture, you really need to turn it to the right. They didn't do that back in the 60s with paperbacks. You know, I don't know of maybe one other one that I can recall seeing that they did this. They've even done this occasionally in the 80s with comic book covers, late 70s maybe, where they turned the cover around so that you saw it from the side rather than from the top. And then they reprinted it late 60s, early 70s. This is another Sad-Eyed Seductress, showing a girl wearing nothing but jewels, apparently. I don't think it's nearly as effective as the other cover personally. But again, popular enough to warrant another cover.
Yeah.
As you can see, as he got into the late 60s, he kind of got into the hippie look. The last one, here's a gal in extreme bell bottoms with long hair that she's raising up. The Streaked Blonde Slave, another kind of a classic cover. But again, he started getting a little bit more, you know, after that many years of drawing ladies, he was losing his imagination, or he had to go more further out to make it interesting. Here's another one called True Son of the Beast. And again, you know, she's an important figure, but a lot of the stuff that's going on in the background is very interesting as well. Looks like she's hiding her face in her hat. Her hat clearly matches the shoes. So well done, McGinnis.
Yeah.
So again, he wrote a ton of books. Again, they're more lightweight. They're not really hard-boiled, in my opinion. But again, great covers. If you're in used bookstores, they're harder to find nowadays since collectors like me have snapped them up. But you can still find them on eBay, if nothing else. You might pay a little bit more than I paid back in the day. When my wife and I first got married in the late 70s, you know, we didn't have a lot of money, so I used to haunt used bookstores and buy everything I could that had a great cover. And then it was only years later that I started reading the books and decided which ones I really liked a lot and so forth. But I had by then probably over 100 Carter Brown covers with McGinnis covers by themselves. He did that many, just a huge amount.
Boy, yeah,
And moving to another author, Robert Dietrich. Let me hang on. I think I have something to say about Dietrich. Give me a moment, please.
Sure. I didn't realize a lot of these artists clearly did. How prolific were some of them?
Oh, a huge amount. I mean, McGinnis by far maybe the most, but you know, after if they couldn't afford McGinnis, they got lesser. And in the 50s and early 60s, Barry Phillips was very sought after. Robert Maguire was another highly sought after artist. I
Maguire,
don't have a
that's
lot of
what-
examples by him for whatever reason. There's one coming up that I'll show you, but that might be the only one in my run here. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you about Bentley, Steve Bentley book here by Robert Dietrich. This is the rare occasion where maybe the author is more famous than the character. You know why? Because Robert Dietrich was a pseudonym, one of several used by Watergate conspirator E. Howard Hunt. Yeah, that guy. Yep, it's a shame in a way because Steve Bentley's series simply rocks. It's a great, entertaining, high-energy, hard-boiled series. Perfect example of late 50s, early 60s PI work. Though he actually wasn't a PI, believe it or not. And again, only in this presentation will I present to you a chartered accountant as the hero of a book series. Steve Bentley was actually a chartered accountant, but he got thrown into all these strange situations and ended up basically serving as a PI. Dietrich or E. Howard Hunt wrote 10 books featuring Bentley. Another series, if you have an interest, please look for them, check them out. Again, Rob will tell you if any of these authors they've got in the library. I suspect not, other than like, Ian Fleming, possibly, Earl Stanley Gardner, Perry Mason books, things like that. They're kind of a lost niche or genre that we don't have so much anymore. So anyway, this is the house on Q Street, again, McGinnis cover. Another cool McGinnis cover on Angel Eyes here. Different, she's kind of a beatnik here with one shoe on, one shoe off, playing the bongo drum there. All right. Next up, Steve Bentley's Calypso Caper. I should have some Calypso music to put on here in the background. I think this is the only example of an artist by the name of Tom Miller that I have here today or tonight, but it's a great cover, I think. Great face on the Black Beauty there. Very, very nice tropical feel to that cover based on the Calypso Caper title. So artist did a good job on that one. We talked about a female PI just briefly, Mavis, one of the Carter Brown series, but probably the most famous female PI at the time of the 50s and early 60s was Honey West. A lot of people might remember the short-lived television program. You remember Honey West?
Was it Anne Francis? No.
Ann Baxter, maybe, wasn't it? I don't know. Let me see. I'm sure I made notes here.
Anne Francis.
What's
it
that?
Is Anne.
It is Anne Francis? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very
Beauty,
good.
Mark and all from Forbidden Planet. No, not Forbidden Planet. Anyway, go ahead. Excuse me. Greg.
Well, anyway, yeah, you're right. Here's my notes. I found it. Honey was played by Anne Francis, a drop-dead gorgeous and dead ringer for Honor Blackman, the woman who played Pussy Galore in the James Bond Goldfinger flick. So that came out about the same time, the television program and the movie or whatever. But anyway, this is called Girl on the Prowl, though originally I think it was called The Case of the G-String Murders. Interestingly enough, Honey was not really the smartest detective around. She relied on her boyfriend, Johnny Doom, actually, to do a lot of her work for her. But she became famous, and she actually, the artist Fickling is actually two people. It's Gloria and Forrest Fickling. So it was a husband and wife team that wrote the Honey West series. And they were close friends with Shell Scott's creator, Richard Prather. So there you go. They hung out at the same parties and so forth, the Ficklings and the Prathers. So that's kind of a neat thing. This particular cover is that Robert Maguire cover I was mentioning. So again, that same style as McGinnis, lesser, and some of the others featuring in the forefront the female figure there. Another Honey West here, another great cover in my opinion. Another Maguire cover. This is Kiss for a Killer. Again, Honey's got the gun pointing right at you. And apparently, I think that may represent more often than what was actually represented within the book, because I quoted here, it says a typical exclamation from Johnny Doom to Honey was, "Honey, where are your clothes?" So apparently she had a penchant for losing her clothes during her adventures. I read these a long time ago, so I don't remember that particular part, but I'm sure it caught my interest back in the day. But again, two great covers by author Robert Maguire. All righty here. Let's see. Oh, back to some more Robert McGinnis goodness here. This is written by author Robert Kyle, featuring a PI by the name of Ben Gates. There were only 5 books in this series, but again, all with really nice covers. This one looks like, you know, looks like she's a model, because there's a photograph stand over here and a light by her right arm bent there. So he doesn't look like a photographer though, but I think that's what, well, does he to you? He doesn't to me. But anyway,
No.
that's a great cover. And then here's another one. This is a classic cover.
Yeah,
You've seen this reprinted as posters even. It's a Ben Gates mystery, Kill Now, Pay Later. Again, it's a McGinnis signed cover. I mean, not actually signed by the artist.
Hey, Greg,
Yes.
I'm jumping in again. Forgive me. That image, and I could be wrong, but I've got at least one book that I purchased a few years ago about Robert McGinnis, and this image might be the cover. Anyway, it's a great image.
Tell you what, since we're on schedule, let me turn away from the computer 1 second.
Ooh, we're losing your audio again.
Yeah, take a 5-second break, and I'll be right back with you.
Okay. That's a great image. They're all great images.
They kind of remind me of the
I've got
opening credits.
I've got 2 books here in my hand that feature McGinnis. One is called Tapestry. It's a hardcover. It's the paintings of Robert McGinnis. It was written or edited by Arnie and Kathy Finner. It's a great book featuring a lot of his Western artwork that he did after he retired from the paperback field. And it's clearly got a cowboy on the cover. Almost looks like it might be John Wayne. The book that you might be talking about that I've got is called The Paperback Covers of Robert McGinnis, though that has a Mike Shane cover on it, the one I showed you earlier, Marked for Murder. So, but this issue, this cover that you've seen here, I've seen this being sold for like $25 on eBay in one of a series of 4 or 5 posters that they sell featuring this image. I think they've stripped off the words and just have the image, but it's a great image with a guy holding the gun and a drink in his hand, and the girl with, again, kind of a classic McGinnis cover with one shoe on, one shoe off. His women were always kicking off that one shoe. I guess that was a definitely sexy move back in the 60s.
Yeah, it was a buying signal right there. You're right.
There you go. All right, so those are the Ben Gates novels. There's not as many of those, but again, they're well worth hunting out. Another lesser known guy, Jay Flynn was the author. He wrote a couple different series. This one features McHugh. He's the detective, PI. There was only 5 books in this series. Again, these covers, this one and the next one I'll show you, are again, the Barry Phillips is the artist. He's kind of a beatnik artist, guitar player on this cover. And again, kind of like the Shel Scott books, they've got the circular with the figure, the character up at the top right-hand corner. Both of those books do that. So kind of a look from that Avon novels back then. Next, another great series of books. If you've never read a Matt Helm novel, they also made a couple of movies of that. Actually, who played him?
Dean Martin
played him, right? Dean Martin played the character in the movies. Matt Helm was he was an agent, maybe not so much a spy, but an agent for the government. He kind of took on the jobs that nobody wanted to do, the assassinations or, those kind of things, but for the U.S. government. And this one was I think the first in the series, called Death of a Citizen, written by Donald Hamilton. The artist in this one was somebody we haven't talked about yet. His name is John McDermott. And there were 27 books in this series. And I recently completed my my collection of these, probably within the last year, tracking down the later ones. They didn't have nearly as good of covers as these earlier ones. Not quite maybe as good as McGinnis or Maguire or Lesser, but still interesting. McDermott also went by the name of J.M. Ryan. He was an author under that name, and then when he illustrated him, he did his own name, John McDermott. He was a U.S. Marine at one point in time. He worked for Walt Disney Studios, so forth. So kind of an interesting background for him. Here's another book in the series, The Wrecking Crew. You can see kind of the same work.
Remember that movie?
After that, Murderer's Row. Again, a woman in the surf with one shoe in the foreground. Maybe not the best artwork, but again, you know, you see the character up in the upper right corner again. So that's kind of a trademark for these books you could look at from Gold Medal and other places, Avon, and then the artwork down at the bottom with the book title and the author's name right prominently in the middle.
Yeah.
The last one before we open up to more questions or whatever I want to talk about in my series tonight is the Travis McGee novels by John D. McDonald. Another great series. If you've never read the Travis McGee books, I highly recommend you try to find those through the library or the used bookstores. McGee wasn't really a PI. He was an adventurer. He lived on a boat down in Florida, and people found him when they were in need, and he was kind of a troubleshooter and tried to help them get out of their problems in ways that only he could help them with. Interesting, kind of like the female PI writers that say A is for something and B is for something. All of his titles have a color in the title. So you can see this one is called The Deep Blue Goodbye. Next one was Nightmare in Pink. Well, these might not be in the, they're in order, but they might not be 1 and 2 type of thing. I might have just pulled out some good covers. Purple Place for Dying, The Quick Red Fox.
Whoa.
Interesting to note, if you look at this, you will find that the picture of the character, Travis McGee, in this case, he's down in the lower left-hand corner, that is drawn by McDermott. And then the character that's in the forefront, the girl in this case, is drawn by Ron Lesser. So this is the case where I'm not sure who came first, McDermott or Lesser, but they decided that they loved McDermott's vision of Travis McGee, but they liked the artwork better of, at least the ladies, by Ron Lesser. So going back, you see again on the lower right, you get McDermott's figure of Travis McGee or headshot, and then you get the girl drawn by Lesser. Again, that's all the cases in each of those books. So that is one of the rare occasions where the book company, this case, Fawcett Gold Medal Books, chose to use 2 separate artists on their cover. I'm sure they only paid once maybe for, you know, each of them, and then they kept doing them for them. But anyway, that is a quick overview, and I know I talked fast, and I know I showed covers fast, but I wanted to give you a feel for the artwork that was being put on paperback books back in the 50s and 60s, and I also wanted to leave a little room for some questions. Since the last time I did a presentation on comic books, I ran out of time and there wasn't really much time for questions. I had to stay afterwards. So at this point in time, I can either pull back other covers and let you relook at them, or you may ask me questions and I may or may not be able to answer them, but I'd be happy to field any questions you might have.
59. Well, I got a bunch, but I've spoken a lot. I want to let someone else go for a minute before I jump in.
Anybody? I mean, that's fine if you don't. Like I said,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
This, and I don't know if other people can see this. This is a book from, I think, 1959. So it fits the 50s and 60s motif that I just adore, that I bought on eBay. And the name of this artist Just look at that cover. Blonde with an explosion going off in the background, as one does. The name of the artist, real quick, and I wanted to ask you, Greg, was an artist named, if you've ever heard of them, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Bob Hilbert. And I don't know anything about him, but I just, some of these artists were better than others, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and some of them spoke to you individually for whatever reason that may not have spoke to somebody else.
Right, that's true. And we've talked to know a lot about McGinnis, but these guys had to create these fast, and they had to make them eye-catching so that someone said, yeah, I'll pay 50 cents for that.
Right.
So, you know, they had to tell some kind of a story, just like a good comic book cover, I guess, in one image. You got to wonder what happened to all of that original art. I guess it got thrown out, or some of it did.
A lot of time, I'm not familiar with that particular artist. Like I said, I pretty much did a narrow focus of PIs with a little bit of lawyers and spies in there just to make it interesting. I could do a whole nother one on science fiction book cover, paperback book covers, with the Frank Frazetta work and things like that, Jeff Jones, people like that, that I did not even talk about here. But you're right, even really going back into the 30s and 40s, the pulp magazines that came out, the dime pulps or whatever, that's where the artist really became known doing individual covers and artwork to draw the buyers to the stand to make them want to pick up that. So they, like you said, told a story in the picture as best they could. Sometimes it matched the story within. Sometimes it had nothing to do with any of the stories in the pulp, but it didn't matter. It was a great cover. So the editors said, yeah, I'll buy that cover. Unfortunately, I know this for a fact, most of those covers got thrown away. They were purchased for printing, and then they were not returned to the artist. It was very rare any covers were returned to the artist. I mentioned Frank Frazetta. That was one of the things that he learned early on in his career when he started doing covers, is that he stopped doing them if they would not return his original artwork. And that was the deal breaker for him. If they would return his artwork, he would allow them to print the cover. And then, as you know, his family still today makes money off of selling posters and reprint images and things like that. So he was a very wise man to know and keep control of his own art. Most of those guys that drew and painted wonderful things, they never have a record of their own stuff. They never kept it.
I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to be quiet, let other people talk. But to that point, Greg, because these were paintings, I remember reading something somewhere about some publishing house closed down, got bought out, whatever, in the 50s. I can't remember which one. And they had all this original pulp art or paperback book cover art.
Sure.
And they had to get rid of it. So it literally ended up down on the street next to a fire hydrant or something, just to be picked up by the garbage man, these stacks of original oil paintings. And I wonder what an original 60s or 70s, if any 50s are left, who knows, painting would sell for now. It's got to be tens of thousands of dollars, I would think.
Well, I mean, you look at the early works of some of the early comic book artists. There's not that many of them. The Steve Ditko's, the Jack Kirby's. I mean, they go for thousands and thousands of dollars. I mean, I can't afford that kind of thing. But, same deal. They did the work for hire for the companies. The companies felt, whether it was Marvel or DC Comics, felt that they owned the artwork. They stuck it in a folder and then stuck it in a room until the room filled up. And then they decided, we got to make room for the new work. So they would give it away to people visiting the offices. They would pay their lower paid employees that went on to become comic book writers or artists to cut the artwork in half and dump it in dumpsters. There's a couple of comic book guys that became infamous because, they cut the art in half and then they put it under their coat and they took it home. So a lot of guys, so back even into the 60s and into the 70s, the companies that bought the artwork from the artist did not treat the artist. And the artist had grown up in that era where they made their money doing the artwork. They never thought about that it was the fact that they would be worth money or that they could resell it later. And then they, learned afterwards there is money in them, our art pages, and they ought to get them back so they can return, and sell them at conventions or, through auctions and things like that.
Did you see Mary Jo's question about women artists and authors? It just
I did not. So I don't have that screen up. So would you read me her question?
about whether there were women artists and authors in this genre, I think. Do you know?
Well, I told you that the G.G. Thickling was actually a husband and wife team that wrote those. There wasn't a lot of female artists writing this type of material. In the science fiction field, there were more female writers doing books and so forth. A lot of times they had to use a male pseudonym on their cover to get it printed in
Oh, wow.
the late 50s or whatever. It wasn't probably until the late 60s that it became okay for a woman science fiction author to have her name on the book cover. Sad as
Wow.
that is, that's the truth. You know, terrific writers. Now I'm going to go blank. I wasn't thinking about science fiction, but Merritt is her last name. A terrific author that did stuff. Not so many artists that I know of. Though I once went into a home in Dearborn. My wife and I were looking at the house as a possible buying, and I found this wonderful artwork on the walls just covering by a female artist called Rowena. And I asked them, I said, well, you know, is she a Rowena favorite or something, you know, a fan? And he said, no, that's actually artwork by her sister. So her house was just filled with fantasy, science fiction kind of art. So she drew dragons and fairies and things, just gorgeous stuff on her walls. And it wasn't even the artist's walls, it was her sister's walls because she loved it. And it was like, oh, do I get the artwork if I buy the house? And they're like, no, we didn't buy the house. But it was another example of a terrific female artist. In comic books, there was only a couple of them. Ramona Fradon for DC Comics. She drew a number of things for DC for a number of years. Marie Severin was famous at Marvel Comics, and before that in the 50s at EC Comics. So she did more lettering and paste-up work for the EC line. Her brother, John Severin, did a lot of artwork for EC. Later, some lesser amount for Marvel Comics, and then Marie did a lot of artwork for Marvel during the 60s. Another terrific female artist, well worth searching out if you're a comic book art fan at all. Trying to think of other female artists that I know of, or authors. I'm sure there are, but again, mostly in the science fiction and fantasy realm or genre, rather than the kind of the male-oriented PI spy area.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I say there's probably as many female writers of mysteries anyway, as maybe more than males. But back then, not so much. Hope that answers your question.
Are there? No, never mind. I'll be quiet. I wonder if they reprint any of these. Maybe they, you know, by these I mean any of the old great 50s, 60s, and 70s apparently artwork. I mean, occasionally books like Postman Always Rings Twice, The Killer Inside Me, these things will get republished.
Right. With
retro-looking art on it that may be current, but it's, you know, obviously made to look older. I remember buying a few of those back in the 80s, I think, paperbacks.
Right. Yeah, mostly they'll run new artwork. Like I said, the hard case crime books sometimes will run original art, and then sometimes they'll reprint older art as well. There's a couple of other book publishing companies. I'm drawing a blank now on those. There's two different other book companies that I buy from online that reprint old books, and a lot of times, like they'll print like 3 novels by like Carter Brown, for example, the first 3 Al Wheeler novels, and they use one of the covers from those original books as their cover as well. So they are reprinting them occasionally, but mostly they go for new art. But like if you walk in a bookstore today, everything you see has got a large title or a large author. It's very rare that you get a cover with art that you can just go browse a section and say, oh, a great cover, I'll buy that book. You know, I find it's disappointing.
There was another question, again, I don't know if other people can see this, Greg, about, do you know anything neat from Mary Jo about Patricia Highsmith?
The author, I've never read her. I think she probably spans maybe 60s through today. I unfortunately can't speak to her because I've never read her. So a lot of the, I gotta say, I may be, showing my age or whatever, reading male authors about hardcore PIs rather than the lady detectives. I've always wanted to read like Ivanovich or whatever, because she writes a PI, doesn't she? Can't think of her name offhand, or the one that writes the A4, B4, whatever. But I've never got around to those. I need to check those out from the library. My local library has a good mystery section, so I'll have to check those out, specifically looking for some female authors to upgrade my education.
How about Mickey Spillane? Do they have, is there artwork of those paper? I remember a lot of photographs, like he would use his young, attractive blonde wife, wouldn't he, in some of those
It was his
covers?
wife, yes. Yes, classic I, the Jury, the Erector set was the probably the one that every teenage boy lusted after for the cover alone. And then when you opened up the book, you got this great storyline. But again, I don't own any. That would have been the 50s. I unfortunately do not own any, so I don't know if there was any real great cover art on those books. I own the 70s or late 60s print versions with those great photo covers. But this was about art.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about with those covers, Greg. But,
right.
Yes, but I just wonder if there's any good artwork in the earlier era.
Yeah, I don't know. And again, I did not go online researching things. I had, so many things in my own collection that I didn't need to go looking online. I reiterate, everything that you saw today came off of my shelf.
Yeah, that's amazing. How many do you have? Would you guess, or do you know?
Hundreds and hundreds. I've got I don't know. I've got
several hundred.
Here is just packed. It's probably, I don't know if there's 50 across per shelf and 8 shelves or something. I don't know. I don't think I have thousands, but I certainly have hundreds of paperbacks in just this PI mystery area. Then I've got another 200 in fantasy science fiction, and then another 100 or so that I would call pulp reprints, The Shadow, The Spider, and then TV movie tie-ins, The Get Smarts, the I Spies, the Partridge Families, the Avengers, all of those books. A lot of them had photo covers based on the TV programs. So I've got at least 100 or 200 of those kind of books as well. That was the one good thing when I moved 3 years ago out to a lake house after I retired, is that I bought a house that had a lower level that became basically my man cave. And I had room to display things that I had stored in boxes previously that never could get out to enjoy. Now at least I can pull them out and enjoy them.
Mary Jo also added that Highsmith wrote Strangers on a Train, apparently.
Okay.
Which I did not know. That's a great, I know the movie.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the movie as well. I've not read the book.
Great story.
But generally, I mean, I know that, some people will disagree with me adamantly, but I find generally 95% of the time, a book is so much better than the movie because you can picture it in your own mind. And generally there's more room to develop characters and so forth, where in a movie, they kind of have to input the character right immediately and, give you a quick summary of what they're about, and then they go to the storyline. So you don't get the background that you might get to in a paperback book or a novel type of a situation. So on very rare occasions, I have found a movie better, but, mostly I find a book a lot better. My imagination, I guess, can run rampant versus I only seeing the director's vision in a movie. Not that I don't like movies. I love movies, but with that said, give me a book any day.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there.
If I could interject.
Sure.
Okay, our library does have, it has a big volume collection of the Earl Stanley Gardner Perry Mason books, as well as his DVDs. And we also have a DVD set, I think probably the whole series of Honey West.
Okay.
And currently on the newsstand is Retro Fan, the magazine, and they have an article on Honey West. With,
what a great tie-in. I've not picked up that issue yet, so
with
I have read the first,
yeah.
I don't know, 3 or 4 of them, I think, 2
Yeah.
or 3, I don't know, but I haven't seen that latest one, so I'll have to go looking for that now.
Yeah, check it, Barnes & Noble. They have, in the article, they have a few pictures of book covers.
Cool.
And I'm going to throw into the pile here, which has nothing to do with Greg's presentation, forgive me. But tomorrow's publishing, which publishes Retro Fan, and Jack Kirby Collector, Alter Ego, Comic Book Artist, back issue. I talked with John Morrow for the first and only time about 2 weeks ago, thank him for all the work they do. And he was literally in his kitchen with his wife stuffing envelopes to mail stuff out because, of course, they've limited in what they can do with the pandemic as well. And if you've ever bought stuff from them, you probably got the email from a week ago, kind of quietly, nicely, but firmly beseeching people to buy a half subscription or buy clearance issues because they've lost a lot of their avenues to selling their product. And I think they're struggling. So anyway,
it's a good point, Chris. Any small business, obviously, that has had to go through the last couple of months have suffered enormously. And so I'm sure they fill in. I did get that email. I am a subscriber to the Jack Kirby Collector. I love that magazine.
Yeah, I'm
and I have
that one. That reminded me.
I bought other of their books, especially when they offered their sales. It's a great way to pick up collectibles. Some of the ones that are behind me right here, maybe some of their books I could pull out and say, oh yeah, here's one from Tomorrow Press or whatever.
I know we're getting off track. I love their work. I think you do a great job of presenting it. So I'm with you. I bought about 5 of them a month ago, 40% off. So anyway, Greg,
I remember while you were talking about that, one of the companies that today are reprinting some of these great books is Stark Press, S-T-A-R-K Press. And you might check those out online. They've got some cool books and they're reprinting. And there's another company I buy from that reprints the pulp spider novels that I don't have a complete collection of yet. Still working on those.
Stark Press. Oh, he's got his hands in everything, that guy, Tony. Greg, who would be, one other thing then, forgive me, here I go again. Who would be in your pantheon? You've got McGinnis, and we talked about him. Who else would you put for you in that group? Would Maguire be in there?
I think so. I don't own as many Maguires. I've never encountered that many in what we call the wild, where you're going out and finding them in a used bookstore or whatever. It's why I don't own that many of them. Ron Lesser is good, not as good as McGinnis. Then I collect, the Frank Frazetta novel book covers. He did the Burroughs novels. Yeah. A lot of those had Frazetta, and then obviously the Howard Conan books. The covers that Frazetta did are the best by far. I collect Jeff Jones that did a number of covers, science fiction, fantasy kind of sword and sorcery kind of books. Yeah. Those kind of people. Jim Steranko, another guy in the comic book field, did I don't know, 18 or 20 paperback covers, reprints of The Shadow a number of years ago, probably now 30 years ago or whatever. Oh, but those are highly collectible and worth checking out.
There's a good sampling. There's just some great work out there. I just want to.
There's a guy, and again, forgive me, ladies, if you're still with us. There's a guy called Robert Bonfils that did more adult kind of artwork covers, and he did what we'd call, I guess, the novels that got sold at the newsstand that were under the counters. So those might have been more softcore kind of novels, and he did those kind of covers for all of those books. Though he did also, if you find Corinth in the 60s reprinted, like Operator 5, Secret Agent X. These were pulp characters they put reprinted in paperback form. Those have Bonfil covers. So he did some regular above the board covers as well. So he's an interesting guy to try to collect. There's a series of books that kind of are a James Bond spoof written supposedly by somebody called Clyde Addison. Is that what it is? I don't have one in front of me, unfortunately. But it stars Secret Agent 0008. So it's a play on 007 kind of a thing. So it's kind of a spy science fiction-y joined together, kind of smashed together. And Bonfield did the covers for those. And I tell you, you cannot find one of those for like less than $50 now. I happen to own a couple of them just because I found them in used bookstores, probably for 50 cents back in the 70s or whatever. But I never could find any more of them. But they're kind of a hard find. But they're highly collectible now. You can find them on eBay, like I said, but be prepared to pay $50 to $100 just for one of those. And truthfully, the stories aren't worth it, even though it's got cool artwork on the cover. You can look that one up on eBay, Robert Bonfils. It's Bonfils, I believe. Not 2 L's, 1 L.
Well, for me personally, this is my all-time favorite cover. I'm not sure why. I think because Mom had it on the shelf when we were kids.
Okay.
And the artist, not that any of you asked, forgive me, the artist is a guy named Charles Binger. This is from 1955. And
Yeah, I've heard that name before.
Have you? The colors
that
in
one
it.
I've heard of. The other one you mentioned I hadn't heard of.
And the colors, and of course, that image tells a whole story. And they made a movie out of it with Rock Hudson.
Okay.
Anyway, well, I've really enjoyed this, by the way, Greg, if I forget to mention that before we go.
Well, thank you for saying. I know we didn't have a huge crowd, but I know Rob is planning on making this available to the library patrons, and we'll see if they get many views. They get lots of views, maybe they'll have me back for a science fiction fantasy paperback book cover presentation. Or if this one is a bomb, well, that's the last time you'll see me other than trivia night.
Quality, not always quantity, Greg.
Well, I'm not worried about it. I told Rob, hey, I'll talk if there's nobody online, and then they can just have it for, in their repertoire kind of a situation. So
Amen.
I'm glad those of you that joined us did. Appreciate it. And
Yeah,
thank you for taking the time to sit in and share an hour and a half with me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I've got to run, but thank you very much.
Well, good. Chris, good luck in Arizona. Keep in touch.
Yeah, we're miserable here. No, we are hot and happy. So, and you guys take care up there. I know Michigan's been through a lot the last couple of months, especially. So.
Yeah, it's been a tough couple of months.
Yeah. All right, guys.
But
Good
so
to see you all.
So good.
Great to see
All right,
you
take
too,
care.
Chris. Take care.
Take care. Yeah, take care, Jason, and Mr. Gardner, and
Bye, Chris.
and everybody. Cheers. We happy
Cheers.
few.
Adios, everybody.
Okay, Jason.
Okay. I had the script, Rob, but I can't find it now.
Oh, okay.
Rob, I think you might have to. I think that was the only way I can get. Oh, hold on a sec.
Okay.
I don't know how to get to the script without exiting out of Zoom.
Try doing Alt-Tab and see if that lets you jump around.
Alt-Tab.
Yeah.
There we go. Bingo. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Even though there's not much, there's not many of us left, but let's give it up again for Mr. Greg Turner. If you have a question, need help, or want to share your thoughts and comments on tonight's program, then please feel free to email us at dhrreference@gmail.com. That's dhrreference@gmail.com. Have a question, need help, or want to share your thoughts and comments on tonight's program, feel free to email us at dhrreference@gmail.com. That's dhrreference@gmail.com. This presentation and others are or will be available on Facebook. You can stay connected with us on the World Wide Web by visiting our website, dhcl.michlibray.org. That's dhcl.michlibray.org. Or join us on Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram. And our digital library is always open. By visiting our website, you can go into Hoopla, Ancestry.com, Mel.org, and other wonderful websites. Thank you for joining us.